first thing I saw that Saturday morning was 112 rose bushes folded over like they had finally gotten tired of pretending. By noon, the woman who owned them was standing at my fence in white linen pants, screaming that I had destroyed her life. What she did not say was that every one of those prize-winning flowers had been fed for 3 summers with water stolen from my land. My name is Daniel Mercer. I am 64, and I spent 37 years working as a quality control chemist for a food company outside Madison, Wisconsin. Which sounds dull until you realize dull people are usually the ones who notice when numbers stop making sense. My wife Ellen and I live on 40 acres near a lake town called Bellwether, where my grandfather planted the first apple trees in 1948. My father added a cider press in the 70s, and I came home after retirement to turn the old equipment barn into a small vinegar business. We were not rich, but the land was paid for. The well was ours, and every pipe under that orchard had been mapped by someone in my family. Then Silver Pines estates went up along our eastern fence, all stone mailboxes, decorative ponds, and people who used the phrase community standards as though Moses had brought it down from the mountain. For the first few years, we got along fine. Then, Camille Harrow moved into the corner lot. Camille was polished, organized, and permanently dressed like she expected a photographer to step out from behind a shrub. Within a year, she became HOA president, and within 2, she had convinced the board to spend nearly $50,000 on what she called a demonstration rose garden, conveniently located behind her own house. She said it would raise property values. What it mostly raised was her profile. Camille entered local garden competitions, hosted charity luncheons among the roses, and gave interviews about discipline, patience, and the spiritual rewards of tending the soil. Ellen watched one interview at our kitchen table and said, "Well, that woman can fertilize a sentence better than she can fertilize a flower." I laughed then. I did not laugh the following spring when my irrigation records showed we were using nearly 20% more water than the orchard required. I checked every valve, meter, frost hydrant, and visible section of the main line. Nothing leaked. Still, every night between 2 and 4, the flow monitor showed a steady draw toward the east field. I told myself it was a bad sensor because the alternative meant somebody had crossed onto land my family had protected for generations. My daughter Rachel, a county attorney in Green Bay, listened to me explain the readings over dinner and set down her fork. "Dad," she said, "water does not disappear because it feels mysterious. It goes somewhere." 2 nights later, Rachel and I walked the fence with a borrowed thermal camera. The air was cool, the grass was dark, and about 30 yards from the old maple tree, a warm line glowed beneath the soil running straight from my irrigation trunk under the fence and into Camille Harrow's rose garden. Rachel stared at the screen, then at me. "Do not touch anything," she said. I looked across the fence at those neat rows of award-winning roses shining under the moonlight, and for the first time in my life, I understood how a man could feel furious and completely calm. Rachel made me promise I would not dig up the line, cut it, confront Camille, or even look too interested in that corner of the fence until we had documented everything, which was difficult because patience has never been my strongest quality when someone is stealing from me. But my daughter had the kind of voice that could make a courtroom go quiet, so I listened. The next morning, we called Warren Pike, a licensed irrigation contractor who had worked on farms around Bellwether for 20 years, and by Monday afternoon, he had traced the buried pipe from my main line to a valve box hidden beneath a fake landscaping rock on Camille's property. He stood over the spot with both hands on his hips and let out a low whistle. "Whoever installed this knew exactly what they were doing," he said. "This is not a garden hose. Somebody forgot to disconnect. This is a permanent theft line." He estimated that Camille's rose system had pulled close to 60,000 gallons from my well over 3 growing seasons. I remember staring at the number on his clipboard and thinking about my father checking those same meters every Sunday evening. Not because water was expensive back then, but because he believed a man should know what his land was giving and what it was taking. Rachel photographed every fitting, every reading, and every inch of disturbed soil, then contacted the county water inspector and the sheriff's office. We agreed to perform one final test before disconnecting anything, a supervised tracing test using a harmless blue food-grade dye commonly used to confirm water connections. Warren introduced a small amount into my irrigation line while the inspector watched, and less than 15 minutes later, blue-tinted water appeared in the transparent filter housing beside Camille's rose garden. The inspector took one look at it and said, "Well, that answers that." Unfortunately, Camille arrived before we finished. She came marching across her lawn in a cream sweater and gardening gloves, followed by 2 HOA board members who looked like they had been summoned to witness an execution. "What exactly are you doing near my property, Daniel?" she asked. "Near your property," I said, "is an interesting way to describe standing on mine." She ignored that and pointed at Warren's equipment. "You cannot interfere with HOA infrastructure without board approval." Rachel stepped forward and smiled, not warmly. "Which HOA infrastructure would that be, Mrs. Harrow?" Camille's eyes flicked toward the hidden valve box just for a second, but it was enough. I watched Rachel notice it too. Camille recovered quickly and said the pipe probably belonged to the original developer. Some forgotten drainage feature, and we had no right to make accusations. Warren crouched beside the exposed connection and said, "Ma'am, drainage pipes generally do not pull pressurized water into rose emitters." One of the board members coughed into his hand to hide a laugh. Camille turned on him so fast he almost stepped backward. Then she looked at me and lowered her voice. "You should be careful, Daniel," she said. "People around here already think your farm is outdated and unsightly. You do not want the HOA reviewing every structure, sign, vehicle, and commercial activity on your property." There it was, the real Camille. Not the smiling gardener from the newspaper, but a woman who believed rules were weapons and neighbors were targets. I told her my orchard existed 50 years before her subdivision, and her HOA had exactly as much authority over it as she had over the moon. She smiled without humor. "We will see." By Wednesday, I received a certified letter from Silver Pines Estates accusing me of damaging community landscaping, operating an unauthorized commercial facility, creating a visual nuisance, and tampering with what the letter called a shared water resource. Shared. I read that word 3 times, then handed the letter to Ellen. She adjusted her glasses, read the whole thing, and said, "She steals your water, then sends you a bill for touching it. That is almost impressive." Rachel was less amused. She called the HOA attorney, requested the governing documents, financial records, maintenance maps, and board minutes related to Camille's demonstration garden. By Friday, the attorney had sent over a stack of files large enough to hold open a barn door, and buried inside was something even worse than the stolen water. The HOA had paid for the garden, the pumps, the landscaping, and several years of maintenance, but every invoice had been approved personally by Camille. One contractor listed on the record shared a business address with her brother. Another invoice claimed municipal water service had been installed, though the town had no record of any connection. Camille had not only stolen from me, she had used her neighbor's money to build the thing she was stealing for. Rachel leaned back from her laptop and said, "Dad, this is no longer a dispute about roses. This is fraud. We could have filed everything quietly and waited for lawyers to handle it. But Camille made the mistake of calling an emergency HOA meeting for Saturday evening, planning to accuse me publicly and demand that the board authorize legal action against the orchard." Rachel asked whether I wanted to stop her beforehand. I looked through the kitchen window toward the subdivision clubhouse, where Camille was arranging chairs for the meeting she believed would finally put me in my place, and I said, "No, let her fill the room first." By 7 o'clock that Saturday night, the Silver Pines clubhouse was packed, every folding chair filled, people standing along the walls, and Camille Harrow at the front of the room behind a wooden podium like she was about to declare war on a foreign country instead of an apple farmer. She opened with a speech about protecting property values, preserving community beauty, and defending residents from hostile outside interests, which was a creative description of the man whose water had been feeding her roses for 3 years. Then she pointed directly at me and said I had damaged HOA property, threatened a neighborhood water supply, and targeted her garden out of personal jealousy. A few people nodded, mostly the ones who had not yet seen their annual dues statement, but others looked uncomfortable. Rachel sat beside me with a folder on her lap and waited until Camille finished. Then she stood. My daughter did not raise her voice. She did not need to. She began with the county inspector's report, then Warren's photographs, then the thermal images showing a buried line crossing from my property into Camille's irrigation system. The room went quiet enough to hear the vending machine humming in the hallway. Camille interrupted and called the evidence fabricated. Rachel calmly held up a clear evidence bag containing the section of pipe removed under county supervision, complete with the contractor's markings and installation date. Then she displayed the HOA invoices, the payments Camille had approved, the false municipal water charge, and the contracts tied to her brother's company. One board member whispered, "Oh my God." Another simply covered his face. Camille gripped the podium and said this was a misunderstanding, that the garden was a community asset, that everything she had done had been for Silver Pines. Ellen leaned toward me and whispered, "Funny how community assets always end up behind her house." I nearly laughed, but then Camille looked directly at me and said, "You planned this humiliation." I stood and told her the truth. "No, Camille," I said, "you planned it. One invoice, one hidden pipe, and one stolen gallon at a time." The county investigator entered through the back doors before she could answer. He handed Camille a notice informing her that the matter had been referred for criminal review, then served the HOA with an order preserving its financial records. Nobody applauded. Real life is usually quieter than television at moments like that. People just stared as the woman who had spent years telling everyone else how to live suddenly had no rule left to hide behind. Over the next 6 months, Camille resigned. The HOA sued her for misused funds. Her brother's company repaid part of the landscaping money, and she accepted a plea agreement involving restitution, probation, and a permanent ban from serving on any community association board in the county. Her garden awards were revoked after the local horticultural society learned how the roses had been watered. Silver Pines elected a new board, dropped every complaint against my farm, and paid to remove the illegal line. The following spring, the new president came to our porch carrying a pie and an apology. I accepted both, although Ellen said the apology was better than the pie. We planted clover over the place where the pipe had crossed beneath the fence, and Rachel gave me a small brass marker that read, "Every drop accounted for." I mounted it beside the main valve. Sometimes, late in the evening, I still look across the field toward Camille's old garden. The new owners replaced most of the roses with native grass, but one red bush survived near the back wall. I do not know whether that feels like justice, mercy, or simply nature refusing to take sides. So tell me what you think. Did I go too far by letting Camille expose herself in front of the entire neighborhood, or was public truth the only language she understood? Leave your answer in the comments, share this story with someone who has dealt with an HOA bully, and subscribe, because the next time somebody tells you a little stolen water cannot hurt anyone, remember that one hidden pipe brought down an entire empire.